Hey, what's up guys? I am Polygon and I have a very special treat for you on this Halloween. I've teamed up with the extremely talented Nadia Axel to create one of her original characters. Now I'm sure a lot of you are coming from Nadia's video to check out the second part of creating this character where I will be sculpting it in 3D. But if for some reason you don't know Nadia, she is a 2D artist that can work digitally, traditionally. I've seen her do beautiful things with watercolors, inking. She has some really strong line work and understanding of fundamentals, and she has a YouTube channel where she shows off all of her amazing artwork. If you aren't subscribed to her channel, I've put a link down in the description to her video where you can do just that and check out the first part of our character collaboration. Also, make sure to give her some love in her comments section. Now, Nadia has created a specific character for this collab, and I have not seen it yet. I do know that it is her OC. I'm gonna check it out right now. I have been dying to look at this, but I have withstood the pressure. It is in this email. I'm gonna put it up on screen for you guys as well, but okay, I can see the thumbnail. Here we go, it's loading. Oh my God, holy crap. Oh my gosh, this is so detailed. Oh my God. Nadia, you have outdone yourself. This is amazing. This is so cool. So for those that don't know, this is Diabolosa. This is her original character. She's kind of got like a lot of these demon vibes going on, right? With the name Diabolosa, you'd think that. But I was wondering how she was gonna make this even like more spooky themed for Halloween, and she has done an awesome job as making her a witch. I am loving the texture on her chest. I'm really digging the hair. That is going to be an extremely challenging part for this character for sure. Hair is always tough. Got some awesome feathers in the hat and on the shoulders. Just really, really cool overall. Nadia, you have done an amazing job on this, and I cannot wait to get started. From here, I am going to set up a few things to get ready for this character, and then we can get right into sculpting. So hopefully you can't see up my nose or anything. I know we're kind of super close here and probably a little too close for comfort, but I wanted to give a quick illustration of what digital sculpting actually is, because I figured there'd be a lot of new people here that are probably new to the idea of digital sculpting and maybe even 3D modeling in general. Essentially, digital sculpting is a form of high-resolution 3D modeling. It's a lot easier to show, so let me just do that right now. Essentially, I can push and pull and move this ball of digital clay around as if it were, you know, a traditional ball of clay. Nothing too crazy, right? But I can also do things that I might be able to do in traditional sculpting, like carving in with some kind of a hook or rake tool, if you're familiar with those. Some things that you can't do in traditional sculpting, though, I can sculpt directly on and add clay. So, you know, there's definitely some different features from traditional sculpting, and this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg of what it is. But I think that this kind of helps illustrate exactly what's going on. I am kind of drawing on this 2D tablet surface to create a 3D object. It's a lot to wrap your head around, right? But hopefully this illustrates it a little bit better. Now, because I know a couple people will probably ask, this is called ZBrush. I am a part of their official stream team. I also have been offering training for quite a while, so if you are interested in learning more about ZBrush or just digital sculpting in general, I have a link to my Gumroad down in the description. I'm now ready to begin sculpting Nadia's character. I will be speeding the process up because I don't want this video to be hours upon hours long. Sculpting characters takes quite a bit of time, and this could take well over 20 hours to complete. So for the sake of your sanity and mine, I will be trimming some of the more boring and repeatable steps. One of the fun things that Nadia and I wanted to try for this collaboration was providing each other with some questions. So I will be talking about my process for this character while doing my best to answer some of her questions along the way. And the first question she has here is a perfect way to start. So Nadia asked, what does your overall workflow look like? For Nadia, some of her workflow stages included mock-up, initial sketch, final sketch, line art, and then it kind of went from there. For me, it follows a very similar path actually. The stage that I am working on right now is what is known as blockout. Blocking a character out is the process of nailing down all of the most basic shapes of what you're trying to create. It's kind of like an initial sketch in a way. This is the most important part of the character creation process though, because if you don't nail down the basic shapes early, everything you build on top of that won't be correct. Essentially, no amount of detail or textures later on will save bad form. So it's very important that you take your time during this stage. I also refer to this part as the alien phase on occasion because things tend to look a little wonky in the early stages. Now this is something that you just have to get comfortable with and be confident in your own abilities, knowing that later on it definitely will shape up. It's just like when you're doing your initial sketch, your first few lines are going to be pretty rough. I recommend that you try to get as many parts and pieces in as you can during this stage, because if you want to work on proportions and making things accurate, then you need other parts to be able to compare to, right? That's exactly what proportions are. From here, I go into refinement of what I already have. I'll add color, accessories, and then I'll break symmetry on my character. For quite a while, I will work with symmetry on. That's kind of the standard process when creating a character. It just makes things a lot easier. Sculpting takes quite a while, and the symmetry can be very helpful in those early stages. After I break symmetry, that's when I start posing the character, giving them expression, and it's when things really start to come alive. After I'm done with all of that, I will typically do a couple more rounds of polish, and then render the final character. Rendering is something that is a little strange to wrap your head around if you are new to 3D, so we can talk about that more when we get to that part of the process. Actually, I'll talk more about each of those steps that I just mentioned as we get closer to them. Next up, I'll try to talk a little bit more about what is going through my head during this part of the process while answering another one of Nadia's questions. She asked, what is the part you find most fun to sculpt? And for me, that is the blockout. It is the most difficult and important part of creating your character. There is just a lot that goes into it, and it heavily relies on your fundamental knowledge and understanding of how to translate something that is two-dimensional into 3D. It's almost a bit like solving a puzzle. You're trying to decode and understand the forms that are represented in the 2D image and translate those as accurately as you can to 3D. There's a lot of problem solving that happens at this stage as you discover that certain things just can't be translated to 3D as accurately as you would have hoped, and that is no huge fault of the 2D artist, as it's really almost impossible to account for every little detail being able to revolve around in 3D perfectly. An example with this character is that the proportions of the hat are pretty warped from the front angle we are viewing the character from. And like I said, this is no fault of Nadia's. I have done some characters with wide-brimmed hats that look great from the angle they were rendered from that end up not making any sense from other angles. This is something that is very difficult to foresee, and honestly, compared to some of the other stuff that I have had to deal with, I don't think this one will be too hard. I've received entire character sheets many times where something is drawn one way from one angle and a completely different way that makes no sense from another. Sometimes these things just happen, and it's the job of the 3D artist to work with what you have and try to make it look accurate, not just from the main view, but also worry about the other angles so it doesn't bend or break the rules of reality. The only other example that stands out to me in this character so far as being a possible issue is the horn that is tucked up under the hat. My current fear is that I will have trouble with that poking through the brim of the hat, but it doesn't look too crazy, so I think I may be able to cheat it just a little and make it work. Now, I actually really enjoy working from a single image, much like this concept. I know a lot of people don't because of the huge challenge in trying to translate something from 2D to 3D and still have it be accurate, but I pride myself in my ability to do just that. I have a strong focus and understanding in fundamental form, and because of that, I find this part of the process to, of course, still be challenging, but also extremely fun to do. Typically during this part of the process, I am working very messy, trying to get things on the canvas as quick as I can. A lot of it is about being confident in your abilities and knowing that it will get better as you go. It's really easy to get caught up in what things are looking like now, but just like carving something from a block of stone, you have to see the finished work underneath all of the garbage. Right now I'm just trying to get as many parts and pieces in there as I can for the character, and then I'll start refining a little bit later. I'm looking at the illustration's highlights and shadows to get an understanding of the shapes that I'm looking at, not going for perfect accuracy just yet, but more so the general shapes of what I'm seeing. From here I will be refining the character more, but before I talk about that, let's look at Nadia's next question. She was wondering, how do you paint your 3D characters? And that is an excellent question that's a bit multi-layered. So there are actually quite a few different ways you can go about this, and to better understand how it works, we will look at a simple 6-sided dice, better known as a cube. So the way painting or texturing works in 3D isn't too complicated, but I think this example helps unwrap the idea a little better. Imagine that you print out a sheet of paper that you would like to cut and fold, kind of origami style, into a 6-sided die. So what would that look like? Well, it would look a lot like this. So you would cut this out with some scissors and then crease and fold the shapes into a paper cube. This is what is known in 3D as a UV map. This is just a fancy way of saying how a flat 2D image lines up with a 3D shape. This is a pretty basic example, but if you wanted to unwrap some more complicated objects, the 2D map or paper cutout would be equally more complex. So that is a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, but for me, while I'm sculpting, I actually use something a lot more simple. And that is what is called polypaint. And the name is a little deceptive because the paint is actually applied to vertices, but that is not important. Essentially, polypaint allows me to take a paintbrush and paint directly on my 3D object. Just like in Photoshop, Procreate, Paint Tool SAI, whatever you are using, I can create all sorts of paintbrushes, alpha stamps, I can work with layers, really just a ton of different stuff. Imagine painting, but you can do it on a 3D surface, and that is essentially what I have here. Now I explain the dice example first, because if you want this paint to be used on your character later, you will most likely need to go through that unfolding process. And that is an entirely new discussion that we won't get into right now, but that is the fundamental idea behind adding paint and color to your characters. Let's talk more about refinement. So I am sure you've noticed at this point that the character is slowly starting to come together. Emphasis maybe on slowly. Some more parts and pieces are being added, some more information is now on the character's face. It still doesn't look or feel too much like the concept, but we are heading in the right direction. So I have a lot of things in place now to where I can refine them into the proportions that I am seeing in our concept. This is the point at which I like to start blocking in some rough colors to begin nudging the character even more into the right direction. To play off of what we were talking about before with paint and texture, color is extremely important to the character creation process. You see, color has weight. And what I mean by that is that color can really help you to figure out proportions for your characters. It becomes much easier to see what needs to be tweaked and pushed in order to get closer to the character you are creating. Now really it's not too much about the color for me, but more so the values. The hue is just kind of an added bonus to make the character feel a lot closer to the concept as I push forward. For those that may not know, the colors that we are looking at are created from the combination of 3 different things: hue, saturation, and value. Value is simply how light or dark the color is, hue is where it falls on the color spectrum, and saturation is how much of that color there is. And this plays really nicely into the next question, which is what is the most crucial thing an artist could leave out in a reference? For me, that is the highlights and shadows, essentially the values. I can tell a lot of information off of line alone, essentially just silhouette, but the highlights and shadows are what give that shape form and aid in describing the surface. It helps with things like texture, to let you know lighting direction, just really a ton of different stuff. This is why I tell my students to often avoid characters with black or dark clothing, because it becomes very difficult to see what is going on with that surface. As you can see, Diabolosa actually is wearing black, but Nadia has done a really great job of describing that form, even though we have some dark colors here. If you look at the sleeves, for example, you can see there is a clear separation between light and shadow. And that helps to describe the form and let me know that it is a rounded surface, convex, and cylindrical, as I can imply a few different things about the sleeve shape as well. That also becomes even more helpful. Now, if I were to take this image and remove just a little bit of the variation in dark values, you can see how quickly that starts to become almost impossible to read what's happening on the surface. Everything feels very flat, and there just really isn't a lot of information to go off of. At this point, even the hair becomes difficult to make out exactly what's happening. So that is why I typically would want to avoid dark clothing, but like I said, this one is pretty good on that front. I've sculpted things from sketches before without any shading, but it is much more difficult than something like this with values that help describe the form of the character. Now we're starting to feel a bit more like the character concept. A lot of the colors are there, which really helps, but it still doesn't look exactly like the concept. Even at this stage, most of the work I have is a placeholder. It's there to fit most of the general shapes of the character and give me something to continue building on. The sculpt is going to continue to develop quite a lot from this stage, so this is by no means even close to the final version. And this is what I do professionally, so I am pretty confident we will get there with some time. Right now, I'm still in the very early stages of working on Diabolosa. I would say this is maybe the 25 to 50% mark. So there's still quite a bit more to do. And this is the point at which I see a lot of people actually give up and say that it's good enough. A lot of that has to do with training your eye to recognize what something actually looks like, which is kind of a hard thing to describe if you're new to art. When you're attempting to recreate something in a visual medium, whether it be something from life or an illustration like this one, the skills needed to do that can be split into two general categories. The first being your actual experience and expertise with that medium. So for me, that would be my digital sculpting and modeling abilities. And the other is your observational skills, which when you just flat out say it, doesn't really sound all that important, but I can guarantee you that they are both equally important for this kind of work. Typically when I see people give up around this stage, it's because they don't know how to progress past where they are. And that is typically due to a lack of observational skills. They can't see where things are incorrect in their model. You can improve this skill just like everything else in life, by doing it a lot. It also helps to take breaks and come back with fresh eyes. Another tip for you, a thing that I really like to do, is to screenshot your model and then flip the image to get a new perspective on your work. Kinda helps to rewire your brain so that mistakes stick out like a sore thumb. Sure, the character fits the theme, we have the horns, the crescent moon on the forehead, but it doesn't look exactly like the character, so we aren't quite there just yet. There are a few areas I will take some liberty with that I mentioned before, like the horn poking through the hat, and a couple other areas I've noticed while working. Her chest is quite large, but it looks like there is some perspective warping going on there possibly. It's a little more wide and stretched down there in the concept than what I would expect, so I'll be tweaking that to fix most of the awkwardness that we have right now. I wanted to try shrinking it to make it feel more natural. Even though it wouldn't match the silhouette quite as well, I think it fits the body type better, especially after looking at some additional reference of Diabolosa. Because of this change, it won't match the silhouette from the front as much, but this is something I'm willing to sacrifice from that front view to make the rest of the character read better. And I don't think we really lose all that much from the front view with these changes anyway. It helps to bring the eyes up to the face as well, which is obviously the most important part of the character, so all in all, I'm really happy with these changes to the body. I'll also be trying to make it fit the silhouette a little bit better once I get into tweaking the pose of the character later on. A little more work needed to be done to create things like the wrappings around the neck, the feathers, the spiders, and more of a general pass on just about everything. It's important that we keep everything around the same level of finish so that we don't have too much work done in any one area and leave or forget about something else. This way everything on your model progresses a little more consistently. I'll be doing additional passes on all the new accessories later, but it's nice to just get them in for now. From here I did a lot more boring small changes to things like the eyelashes and eyebrows, as well as adding the texture to the body of the character. I believe these are supposed to be feathers transitioning up from the body, but I really like the flat, scaly look in the concept, so I didn't want to stray too far from that. Another thing I did was I tweaked some of the paint on the body and face to give it a little more depth. You have to be really careful when hand painting in highlights and shadows. I typically want my lighting setup for my render to do most of that work. I would say though, if you are going for that flat and hand painted style, it's best to commit to that early. If you try to go for an in-between style, it almost always looks awkward. The more I worked on this character, the more I felt like the ratio between the head and body was a little bit off, so I scaled up the body to be a little larger in general, made a few proportional corrections, and that felt a lot better. Another benefit from that was that the chest was starting to match the silhouette a lot more closely. For this, I used a tool called Transpose Master. I typically always use that for these kinds of large-scale changes. I also use it for posing, and it's great for a lot of other general tweaks. I'll be talking about it a little bit later once I go to pose the character. While sculpting, if it's a personal project, I won't typically organize my subtools. This is the large list of different items you see over on the right side of the screen. I don't really pay attention to how many I have in a project. It's a lot faster to ignore it and just name your objects later on. But now that I'm getting a lot closer to the final subtool count, I figured it was time to do some boring organization. Name everything and put them in a few different folders to help with toggling visibility later on as I get in to work on specifics. Here's another cool question from Nadia. She asked, what kind of witch do you think Diabolosa would be? And this is something that good character design often conveys. the ability to kind of understand what type of character you're looking at. But of course, Nadia has drawn this character in a number of different styles, which gives each one a unique feel. She actually has a video where she does the style challenge and draws Diabolosa in 10 very different and difficult styles, but she handles them all extremely well, which is something I would love to do for a character, but that would take quite a while for me to sculpt. Typically, I would say that this character often feels very Mistress of the Night, Elvira-esque, but I think in this case, in the cute witch costume, a relaxed half smile, she feels a lot more chill. Maybe like she's just going to a Halloween party or something. So I've worked on the hair a little more, but now it's time to start plussing up the forms to take them to the next level. Right now, everything is feeling flat and boring. It's just not very dynamic like we have in the concept. So normally ZBrush, the software I'm using, is really good at saving if it crashes. But while I was working on the hair, my power went out and I lost a ton of progress and had to redo it all. So that's always fun, but no time to feel bad about it. Just have to get back to work and keep progressing. And hey, if you've already done it once, you can do it again, right? Probably faster the second time around, at least I hope. And this is good timing because Nadia's next question is, what is your least favorite part to sculpt? And for me, that is often anything with a ton of flowing complexity. So lots and lots of hair, kind of like what we have here, hyper detailed clothing folds, or even water. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate sculpting hair. It is extremely rewarding when it's done right. It just so happens to be super time consuming and difficult. You can get a little into a Genova Chen flow while working and it becomes a little relaxing, but there's just so much to do and crashing and losing progress never really feels great, especially on something like this. All in all though, I would say it depends on the character. Each project is so unique, there's not really a part of the process that I can blanket say I hate doing. A recent project I had, it involved a lot of hyper clean and precise simple shapes. And the most difficult thing about that one was how exact everything had to be. So like I said, it really just kind of depends. At this point, I'm about to break symmetry on the character and do some slight posing and expression. For that, I like to initially use this tool called Transpose Master. It takes all these separate parts and pieces and combines them so that you can work on everything all at once. It's kind of like merging all your layers together, but it's only temporary, so maybe not a one-to-one comparison. When working with this tool, it also shows all the lowest subdivision levels of your character, which just so happens to be one of Nadia's questions. She was asking if I could show a low poly version of the character. If I have time, I'll play around with some decimation later to get some really cool low poly effects, but for now I'm going to continue on to some quick posing. Pretty simple stuff, minor rotations for the head, neck, and a few other things, and we should be good to go. Of course, when you do all this, it messes up other stuff on your model, so there's going to be quite a bit of correcting here and there for sure. Not a big change on the pose or really the expression either, but just breaking symmetry even a little bit helps bring the character to life. There are a bunch of tiny fixes that I do next, but a lot of it is repetitive and tedious, so I'm not going to show all of that boring stuff. One thing I wanted to mention though, that I didn't get a chance to do earlier, is how much I like how the bust is terminated. This is a fun thing to play around with in sculpture, at least I think it is, and the tattered sleeves here are a really nice touch. Honestly, there's a lot more I would love to do on this character, but I am sadly running out of time, so that means it is time to send this character over to the render farm. Not really, this isn't a feature-length film, so I'll be rendering the character with a simple 3-point studio lighting setup in Blender. I already have a scene set up with all of my lights, so all I really need to do here is export everything from ZBrush, which is a little bit of a tedious process. And there is of course some prep work there, and I won't get into all of that. If you remembered me talking about the UV maps earlier, some of that needs to be done here, but after all that is finished and imported into Blender, I can set up my materials, my camera, and my lights, and then we're all set to go. I of course do a little bit of post-processing in Photoshop to adjust color, value, lighting, etc. But for the most part, this is where we will end our work on Diabolosa. So here is the final image of the character, in all of its 3D glory. I really hope you like it, and especially Nadia, of course. A huge thank you to Nadia Axel for doing this collab with me. This was so much fun, you absolutely killed the concept. I absolutely love the character, and I hope that I was able to represent your work well in translating it to 3D. Thank you everybody for watching. If you are new around here, click that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about creating appealing characters, check out the link in the description, or go to appeal.academy to learn more about my course. You guys have a happy Halloween, eat lots of candy, get really fat, it'll be great. I'll join you in that adventure, and I will see you in the next video.